Please listen carefully.
Welcome to the Big Ideas for Better Places podcast from CityWorks Expo. My name is Brad Stevens, and it's my absolute pleasure to introduce our guest today, Chris Morrill, the soon-to-be former city manager here in Roanoke and soon-to-be new executive director of the Government Finance Officers Association. Is that correct?
That's correct, right?
All right. I was sure I was going to mess that up here.
You got it.
Well, how are you doing today, Chris?
I'm doing great. Yeah, it's been a busy time here, as you can imagine, but exciting stuff happening in Roanoke.
Well, we've, of course, loved having you here. And your time here has kind of coincided almost exactly with CityWorks Expo's time here. So if you had to say what Expo means to you, how would you kind of define that?
I think strong communities are built on relationships, idea sharing, and listening, engagement, and Expo brings all that together. The fact that we can bring people who think about this stuff, care deeply about communities from all over the country, around the world, here to Roanoke and share that with our citizens. Just an incredible opportunity.
Well, and we, anyway, love Roanoke. So I think my time here has corresponded with yours as well. So I think that speaks. We may not love it as much if you hadn't been here.
Well, thanks. Well, it's amazing. Everybody plays a role in the community building.
Well, so now you have been involved in government stuff for much of your life. I know that you spent some time in the Peace Corps a long time ago, but can you walk us through kind of what led you to this point? What interested you about doing this kind of work?
Sure. Yeah. I grew up in Massachusetts in a very political family. My grandfather was one of the early Irish immigrants in the Massachusetts State House, and my dad was mayor of my hometown. So I observed it growing up, but I realized that I didn't want to be a politician because I didn't like the conflictual nature of it, but really like the idea of service. And so in college, I went to Holy Cross College in Worcester. I did an internship for the town of Leicester, working with the town manager there, and thought, this is what works. Be a professional. You have to understand politics, but not be political, and really be focused on that service.
And you've obviously been doing this for 25 years? How long?
Yeah, close to 30 now. So
Okay.
Right out of college, I worked in Lynn, Massachusetts, and then I went to grad school down at Chapel Hill, which kind of focuses on city management training, and then worked in North Carolina at Savannah for 20 years, and then have been here for 7 years.
Very good. And so, I mean, you obviously, Roanoke has gone through some incredible transformation in your time you've been here, and I'm intrigued to know what you think the role of government and governance is in creating thriving places.
Yeah, I think it's one of many partners to make a community work. When I first came to Roanoke, it was back in 2009 for my interview. I'd never been here before, and honestly, I really didn't know anything about Roanoke. The recruiter said, you may not know Roanoke and you may love Savannah, but you got to check this place out. And so I came up here and immediately struck by, besides the natural beauty, just the openness and welcoming people we have here really is amazing for a southern city. And I think maybe, you don't have to have lived here for 5 generations for people to care and listen to you. So I came in, and I think at that point, the local government, they were kind of insular in the valley. The county and the city and Salem weren't working so well together, and hadn't really built bridges and tapped into the incredible assets we have, like Virginia Tech and Hollins and Roanoke College, Virginia Western. And so I think the role that local government played was I made it my mission to get out and talk to our citizens, our civic organization, about the assets that we had here, so we could recognize what we were. And we talked a lot about what we weren't, but not what we were, and then help connect people together. And so often, if you can get the right people around the table from different fields, across sectors, you can address some of those really challenging problems. Sometimes government's the convener. Sometimes we just need to get out of the way. Sometimes we take the lead, all depending on the issue.
And so, there's kind of 2 trends I hear coming out of that. One, you obviously made a stand to go out and talk to people, listening, but also sharing, and then the importance of collaboration in there as well. And that seems to something that you've really pushed during your time here in some ways.
Yeah, I think with the challenges that the communities face now, that issues like poverty and poor health outcomes, educational outcomes, crime, that no one person, no one organization, no one sector can really make progress in those areas. It's when we reach across sectors, when, for example, with our graduation rate, we're at 58% high school graduation rate 8 or 9 years ago. And when we partnered with Virginia Tech Research Institute, with our libraries getting involved, with the private sector getting involved, with the other institutions of higher learning in our school system, it's now 87%. I mean, an amazing improvement, which someone would say that'll never happen in an urban environment with our poverty rate. But when people work together and concentrated on it, able to move the needle.
Well, I think you've probably faced a unique challenge in some ways because here in Virginia, local government has their hands tied in many ways. And I just wonder if you could talk a bit about what that's like to work in a Dillon's Rule state. And
Sure. Yeah. This is my first experience in a Dillon Rule state. For those who don't know what that is, so in a Dillon Rule state, local governments can only do what explicitly the state legislature says you can do, or state government gives you the ability to do. And I'll give you one example. We wanted to be able to control smoking in our parks and greenways. People are out there in the outdoors, they don't want their kids to be around smoke. We cannot do it without explicit permission from the state, and they won't give it to us. So it can be very challenging. You just have to get creative, and I think what it's forced us to do is build a very strong relationship with our local delegation, and on issues important to us, they've really stepped up and helped us out.
Well, and in some ways, it forces you to play a long game, I would think, and that you guys, I think that's been an emphasis of yours to look long-term about many of these things.
Right, long-term and regionally. So, when it's not just Roanoke, but when it's Roanoke County, Salem, Botetourt County, Franklin County, Montgomery County, all going together, while no one of us has that much power, when we all work together, it really says, especially because it's unusual, unfortunately, for local governments to work well together.
Well, and part of that comes down to sometimes you run into some opposition, and you're going to face that no matter what. And government perhaps faces more opposition than anybody else in some ways. And how have you learned to deal with that opposition in your time?
Yeah, I think people, because of what they see in the national media and the divisiveness, they assume all government is that way. And really, there's challenges at the federal and challenges at the state level. But, local government, we really approach it differently. I think we've taken the approach of some of those divisive national issues. We just can't have control over those. So let's focus on what we can do. What we can do is we can expand our libraries. What we can do is invest in early childhood education. What we can do is build greenways to connect people together. So I think for local government, we're the closest to the people. I think we have to listen intently to what the community needs and what its vision is, and then help create that vision. And really, we have to be accountable, transparent, and deliver what citizens are looking for.
And so that question of what citizens are looking for is such an interesting one, especially because, on a national level, we seem to have lost some shared vision in some ways. And I wonder, how do you create that on a community level? How do you go about bringing a diverse set of people together and coming out with one list of things that we should be doing?
Yeah, we in some cases it's through necessity. So when I arrived in 2010, we were in the depths of the recession. We couldn't do everything that we used to be doing, and so it really forced City Council, working with citizens, they really represent the public out there, to determine what are the most critical things that we need to focus on. And clearly education came out as number one. And through that, we actually raised our meals tax at a time when nobody was raising taxes. And we didn't just raise it, but we then marketed it as Eat for Education. And we saw that tax, the base, rise faster than any other revenue. Because it was clear that citizens valued education, and we listened to that. So I think I think the challenge is, there are always people who come to public hearings and let it know, but I think we have to expand that. Neighborhood associations, We do a statistically significant citizen survey every 2 years so we can make sure we hear from everybody. But then there's also, we always have to think about that voice, the single parent who's working 3 jobs. Who's making sure that he or she is being heard? And sometimes we just need to represent them as we're making our policies.
Well, you guys have done some innovative things in terms of technology and stuff for that, but I think, that's not always going to work. And so it's interesting. And you hope that people don't come out for just the crises, but that's what so often seems to happen. Are there success stories that you want to point to from citizen engagement that might be interesting?
Yeah, I think for us, we've had a really creative guy, Timothy Martin, working on our social media, and social media is particularly when we can have technology in our libraries that it's accessible to everybody. We can really get our message out there, and so we now have 80,000 Facebook followers, more than just about any city in the country, and we've done that through creative stuff, contests. We do April Fool's gags and things, and people share beautiful pictures on the internet, on our Facebook page. But then what that happens is we then have that audience when there is a challenge or we need input. Right now we put out a survey of what the citizens are looking for in the new city manager. And we've had an overwhelmingly strong response to that. So it can't just be one way of communicate. It needs to be two-way, and it needs to be multiple means to do that, from going to a neighborhood association and sitting down with folks to tweeting something out and having people respond to it.
Well, and it's in some ways what you're doing with that is you're opening communication channels, but through the social media stuff, I see you guys also creating a narrative in many ways about what we're doing here. And I'm always intrigued to look at other places. Some while ago, I looked at census data for Chattanooga, who's often viewed as this pinnacle of urban stuff. But the numbers are very similar between here and there. They perhaps got a little earlier start on crafting their narrative. But I wonder if you could talk a bit about how important that narrative is for places.
Yeah, I think that narrative is critical. And that just as I was arriving, the James L. Knight Foundation finished a 3-year study they did with Gallup to find out what is the leading driver of economic development at a local level. And what they found is the higher the level of attachment your own citizens have to your government, the more it's going to grow. So it's not an external thing. It's not tax rates. It's not even crime rates. So the more people love where they live, the more it's going to grow. And so how can you love a place unless you have a good narrative about it? And when I arrived here, people were almost apologizing for it. Gosh, we could have been Greensboro if we did this. We could have been Charlotte if we built a bigger airport. We could have been Asheville. And I was like, that is not, wish you were Asheville is not a great motivational economic development strategy. Let's look at our assets, what we have, which are just incredible, including being the most welcoming place in the country. No doubt about it. Let's build off those assets. And now I think our narrative is very different. I think we see this as community, a really caring, welcoming community with a vibrant downtown, closely connected to the outdoors through our greenways and our mountains, with the values education. And so I think people are getting that narrative, and it's not just local. Now around the country, people know Roanoke.
Well, that's obviously one of those places where partnership comes into play, that you guys have had a number of partners in that. And how is it something that you guys have done purposefully together, or is it just kind of coalesce different partners?
Yeah, I think in many ways it was organic, happening in different places and just coordinating. So, the regional partnership before I came in here, which is our regional economic development, both public-private organization, they had started this outdoor narrative about a year before I arrived. Pete Eshelman and Beth Dowdy doing a fantastic job with that, which is a narrative not just for outside companies trying to bring, but for our own citizens. And started the marathon and the Go Outside Festival. As I was arriving, a new executive director for the Convention and Visitors Bureau was arriving. And it's interesting, he has experience in Chattanooga. I think he saw the opportunity to create a new narrative. I'm coming on board, too, seeing that, the importance of it. And then we have other leaders in other local governments. And with the Chamber of Commerce, with others, with the collab starting, I think we saw this coming together of a unified narrative that tells our story.
When it's a complex story, but it's also one that when you can distill it the right way can be incredibly powerful. And I wonder, we often think of economic development and community development as two very different things, but I think we've seen here over the past few years that those are very intertwined things, are they not?
They are. It's funny. In fact, I try not to use the term. People hear economic development, they think of buildings or factories. Community development, they think of, sidewalks and parks in the neighborhoods. But if you think of it as community vitality, where you need both, we need the jobs, we need the new investment, but then we also need strong neighborhoods, and that may be a community garden. It may be a playground that's going to bring people together. It may be a library that serves the public. So if we think of it in terms of community vitality, it ties together all of that.
And that's such a broad term. Can you talk about what, like, when you see a vital community, what does that look like?
Yeah, I think when you see a vital community, you will see a healthy downtown. So many communities abandoned their downtowns when malls started growing. So you'll see a healthy downtown. You will see, neighborhoods that where people are out on the street, sitting on their porches, walking the sidewalks, going to the playgrounds. You'll see a strong educational system, often creative, especially if it's in an urban environment. Ours has such a great arts and music program. And you will see engaged citizens, not just the typical, business leaders, but you'll see folks throughout the community feeling comfortable to get engaged.
But it's interesting to me that because it's hard. I think one of the struggles that many communities face is that there's sometimes a disconnect between people that care about their neighborhood and people that care about that broader community. And so in some ways it becomes a question of how do those neighborhoods fit into the broader city and things like that. And do you have any words of wisdom on them?
Yeah, I think, you'll often say, you'll hear people say, well, why did you build the downtown amphitheater instead of do this in a neighborhood? And my answer to them is you have to do all of it. First of all, you have to have a strong, healthy core. And so for us, that investment in the downtown, which actually, if you look at our capital plan, it's a fraction of where we spend our money. Most of it goes to bridges and roads. But you can, and I think some people are like, well, just, cut funds, and you can't cut your way to prosperity. You need to cut and you need to invest and be strategic in those investments. So I think for us, starting with the downtown, we quickly moved to funding. We've redone virtually every park in the city with new playgrounds. We're expanding every neighborhood library. We are focusing on sidewalks. Schools are really a neighborhood asset. And so, you have to try to do all of it and do it strategically.
Well, and it's, that on some level that comes down to investment of money, which, is, you're obviously, that's partly your background. That's where you're headed to do stuff. And I think this may be a quote from you, but I may have misappropriate this, that one of the fastest ways to ruin a good community is through a poor police department. But that I would imagine that close behind that, or even more important than that, is a community that works well financially and that has a good understanding of a financial plan. And I wonder if you could talk about how important that is to making things work.
It really is critical. I think to build strong, resilient communities, resilience that's going to be able to survive through the ups and downs of the economy, through natural disasters, other things, you have to build it off a strong financial base. And so you start with that strong financial base. What that's going to give you is flexibility to deal with issues. It is such a volatile world out there. It's going to help you get through that volatility, and it's going to help you continue to make those investments to keep the community moving forward. I think in Roanoke, I keep telling people, for us, it's those investments to keep moving the ball down the field, get the first down. We don't need to throw a Hail Mary pass and, build a huge football stadium or something. I mean, that we don't. Some communities may feel like they need that big Hail Mary pass. For us, it's those investments, and if we're not financially sound, we can't make those.
You're not going to bring back Victory Stadium.
Fortunately, I was not here during the Victory Stadium debate, and I have no opinion on that.
Well, it is interesting because in some ways, because of your position, you're forced to think comprehensively about things, and that those of us that operate in the business sector or the nonprofit sector, or even within city government, there are different departments. It can be very tempting to look at my piece of the pie or my small part. But there's great difficulty in looking comprehensively. Can you speak a bit about how you've managed to look that way?
Sure. And particularly if you look at local government. I mean, if we're a business, we're a $280 million business that does everything from social services to public safety, police and fire, to park and rec, to libraries. I mean, we have a vast array of services that we're providing under that umbrella. And I think where we've been very successful is not working in silos within those departments. For example, our police department knows that they single-handedly cannot combat crime, and so they work closely with code enforcement, libraries, park and rec. They do these neighborhood walks where everyone comes together with the neighborhood to walk through it, to see what things the neighborhood wants to focus on. So yeah, you really do have to address that comprehensively.
When it's even though you're all working together, I imagine that you do have to balance priorities quite often, and that's probably not an easy thing. And so, but at the same time, I think one of the reasons that you're loved in this city is because you listen to everybody. And I wonder, how did you come to find that so important to your governing style?
To listen. Yeah, I think it starts with a personal style. I talked about growing up in Massachusetts. I was the youngest of 6 children, and my oldest brothers and sisters were 10 to 16 years older than I was during the 60s and during those turbulent times. And I had brothers involved in the civil rights movement and the anti-Vietnam War stuff. And I watched lots of arguing and talking past each other. And so did a lot of observing growing up and realized that, listening, you can learn a lot. And even though it may be someone who's giving you feedback that you don't want, there's often a kernel or a nugget of truth in there that you can learn from. So I've found, and often people don't feel like they've been listened to, and particularly with government. So I think sometimes just listening is enough, even if we don't do anything. Just listening and really caring. I mean, I enjoy people. I enjoy hearing their stories. And what frustrates me most is when there is an issue that we just can't solve for somebody.
Well, I think that's. There's so often an impersonality to government, and to be able to put a personal face on something, and not only for that to be a personal face, but for it to be a genuine face is so important. And that for me is what you brought as a genuineness. That I think for me, genuineness is what has made Roanoke so special over the years. And there's not many communities like this, and that's what makes it so welcoming in some ways. So.
I agreed. Roanoke immediately struck me as genuine and authentic. So few places are that anymore. It's something we have to make sure we don't lose.
It's a really nice thing to have, but it's hard to define where it comes from, is it not?
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, you're moving on to a new position here soon. Is there an accomplishment that you look back on your time here in Roanoke that you're particularly proud of?
Yeah, probably it's not one thing. I think probably what it is my sense is there's a different spirit in the community now, where people are feeling good about Roanoke. They're feeling good about the city organization, about themselves, about where we're going, and I think that's probably it, because I think that's something that can be. It creates great potential for more progress. The fact that people are feeling good about themselves and about the community now.
Well, it's been amazing. I mean, when you came here, Roanoke was losing railroad stuff, and that's even continued. But even more, coming from another place that's not a Dillon's Rule state, so you're coming into a Dillon's Rule state, but also Virginia being perhaps the only place in the country where you separate cities and counties. I can't imagine a more difficult position you could have put yourself in some ways. Yeah,
the good thing is I think the community was ready for a change and for progress. And yeah, so you're right. Even as we were arriving and we had to reduce the budget by 10%, we have 10% less employees than we have. At the same time, we increased our reserves, got more financially sound, and made progress. We reversed a 30-year population decline, and now we're one of the fastest growing communities in Southwest Virginia. Crime rate we brought to a 46-year low, graduation rate up, unemployment low. I mean, lots of good things happening, and I think it's because people believed in the community, and good folks, like you, got engaged and involved and made things happen.
Well, it's been the barrier to entry for engagement here is so low, and that's one of the nice things about this community.
You're right. Mm-hmm.
What are some of the biggest lessons you've learned during your time doing this kind of stuff?
Yeah, so I had never been a city manager before. I had been assistant in Savannah, and it's very different. I think some of my key lessons are that, build a strong team. And so I make sure that I meet with every new employee and talk to them about why we do this work. And it's, our product is community, and talk to them about the role they can play in community building. So having that strong team that understands its mission, and then really, I don't know, I guess I figured it out as I went along, how important it is to build ties and relationships across so many sectors.
Those relationships are the key to everything.
Absolutely, right.
Well, it's so interesting because when I hear you say that you meet with every employee and talk to them about why, for me that rings this bell of, we talked about creating shared vision for a community. Really what you're doing, it seems, in that moment is creating shared vision for your organization.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Which is, you can't do anything without that, I imagine.
Exactly. I think consciously your organization, your community is going to have a culture, whether you drive it or not. So why not think about the culture you want and get leaders to make sure you're creating the culture that's going to be best for the community and organization.
Well, that's an interesting question there in terms of leadership. What what role do you think leadership has to play in these kinds of discussions? I mean, there's that can come in many different ways, but what do you think that effective leadership looks like?
Depending on the situation, I think for that long-term sustainable improvement that you want, leadership starts first with listening, with not necessarily imposing the leader's vision on people, but really listening and understanding so you can help them craft their own vision, and then just continuously talking about that and getting people engaged where you can to move things forward.
Well, as we close up here, I wonder if you could share a story about kind of a story that encapsulates some of what you've learned and what you think is the essence of building stronger communities.
I'll tell you, this is a story that actually I share with every new employee. About 3 years ago, I got an email from a woman. She said that she was a young mother in Roanoke, and she said, "Mr. City Manager, you don't know me, but I have to tell you about an incredible difference that one of your employees made in my son's and my family's life." And she went on to talk about how her son, at 2 years old, wasn't speaking. Brought him to the doctor. She said he's speech delayed, nothing physically wrong. Watch for something that sparks his interest. So she watches. So every Wednesday morning, she notices this little boy is up at the window. It's excited as can be. She walks out and realizes that Wednesday is trash day. And so our trash truck, the fully automated one that has the big arm that picks up the can and puts it in there. So the next week, she walks out with her son, and our driver sees the little boy, waves, puts the thing in. The little boy's out there next week. He actually gets out of his truck, gets down and talks to him. Well, the little boy's so excited that his first words are about this trash truck. They form a relationship. The driver brings him his own little trash truck, and he starts speaking in sentences, full paragraphs, completely recovered. Fast forward a couple of years, he's in kindergarten. It's Dress as Your Hero Day. His mom comes in, gets an example of a uniform, and makes him his own little public works uniform because that driver was his hero. I tell this to employees because, and really no matter what you do, whether you work in government or not, if you pay attention and you don't know what opportunity you may have, but you can make a difference. I mean, this guy, he's driving a trash truck. I know how important that is because I know how important it is to have clean streets, but people might discount that profession. Everyone can make a difference. And when we're all recognizing that and reaching out to each other, that's really what builds a community.
Again, those relationships coming back to
exactly
play.
Right.
Well, thank you so much, Chris, for being on here. We have so appreciated your support of Expo and so appreciate what you've done for Roanoke, and we wish you the best as you move forward here.
Right. I hope to stay engaged. Maybe I can make Expo this year, or definitely in the future.
Well, we've got a ticket for you.
Thanks.
Thank you for listening to the Big Ideas for Better Places podcast today. If you like what you hear, please subscribe and leave a rating. It really helps other people find out about our fascinating guests and find the information that we have to share. Lastly, please save the date for our upcoming event, October 5th through 7th in Roanoke, Virginia. And keep up to date by following us on Facebook and checking out our website, cityworksexpo.com. That's cityworksexpo.com. Thank you guys again and look forward to seeing you next week. Thank you.